Stage 3. Aha. No indicator will save you, only risk, and headspace do. You call it the aha moment, like it is enlightenment. I call it the point where traders swap one delusion for another and feel smarter while bleeding slower. Counterintuitive. Good. The more convinced you are that you finally get it, the easier it is to step into a cleaner version of the same trap. The headline sounds mature. No indicator. No system. No robot will hand you steady profits. The difference sits in the human. Then you add a fresh fantasy, a single moving average, plus tidy mindset and money management will pull cash out of chaos. That is not wisdom. That is a simplicity fetish. Here is what lives under that sentiment. You want out of the indicator circus, but you still crave a talisman. You say one simple tool can work if your head is straight and your money rules are strict. Translation: you want the market to reward discipline on schedule. Markets do not pay salaries for good behavior. They pay when the statistical structure favors your tactic, and that structure shifts without permission. A moving average that cuts like a scalpel in one regime turns into a butter knife in the next. Then you grab psychology books and repeat the clean mantra: nobody can predict the next 10 seconds, let alone the next 20 minutes. I agree with the line and reject what you do with it. You use uncertainty as a blanket, not a compass. Instead of cutting your losses hard when the premise dies, you keep clicking signals because prediction is impossible and process is everything. That is how passivity gets laundered as professionalism. Now, the bonding ritual. You align with your system and finally feel comfortable. Comfort is not an edge. Comfort is a narcotic. Trade all signals with a high probability sounds scientific until you ask who measured it, in what sample, and what happens when the tails bite. Saying the next trade has a higher chance after a loss because the system always wins over time is not statistics. That is a gambler whispering to a mirror. The desk does not care about your streaks. It cares about risk shape and regime change. Then the soft excuse slides in. When a trade loses, you are not angry because the market is unpredictable and it is not your fault. Blame is not the point. Calibration is. Shrugging and saying random is a cheap alibi for lazy review. The line between healthy detachment and learned helplessness gets razor thin when every red trade is forgiven by philosophy. You feel righteous for executing, though the process was underpowered. Trading is just a game. Do the one job and follow all signals. Games have referees and timeouts. Markets do not. Your leverage, talk, and risk ratios finally move from slogans to habits. But look at the order. Confidence first. Prudence second. You sized up because you felt safe, not because the edge expanded. Safety sourced from mood is how traders get wrecked on a pump and dump while insisting they are sticking to process. Hope is not a sin. Hope disguised as math is. So yes. Stage 3 ends when you admit you cannot predict. Necessary. Sure. Complete. Not even close. You stopped worshiping forecasts and started worshiping consistency. Different altar. Same prayer. You ditched crystal balls for checklists and quietly expected the checklist to stabilize a storm it does not control. The loop looks professional. Follow every signal. Accept every loss. Promise the curve will bend back because the system wins in the long run. If the long run becomes a license to ignore present feedback, what exactly do you think part 2 will expose about this comfort you are defending? You called comfort progress. I called it the silent leverage you never booked on the sheet. If the market is unknowable in the next 10 seconds and you accept that with a straight face, the very next sentence in your story contradicts it. You talk like your chosen signal set carries high probability. Like the next trade gets a bump after a loss because the simple system always wins. That is not acceptance of uncertainty. That is superstition wearing a suit. You ditched crystal balls only to start stroking a lucky coin and calling it discipline. No worries. Right. Keep clicking. The checklist will absolve you. The moving average fantasy is the cleanest tell. You say one line can print money if your headspace and money rules are sharp. The catch sits right in the phrasing. If your headspace is right, headspace is not an input the same way price is. It drifts. It gets loud when drawdowns stretch. It gets cocky after green streaks. Your story never asks how that human drift contaminates the simple rule. You want simplicity to protect you from yourself, while admitting the self is the decisive variable. That is like wiping a lens with greasy fingers and bragging about crystal clarity. Then comes the comfort in obedience. You promise to take every signal, like an assembly line worker punching a clock, because the job is to execute, not predict. Sounds professional. It also dodges the only hard question embedded in your claim. What defines a valid signal when the environment morphs? Your script treats regime changes like weather reports you politely ignore. You keep saying trade all signals without defining how a signal survives a context shift. If the line crosses price in chop, it is a meat grinder. If it crosses in trend, it is a runway. Your narrative lumps both into the same bucket and wonders why wrists get cut, even as you swear you are being consistent. You also slide into the sweetest lie on the page. Losses do not sting because unpredictability clears your conscience. Losing without anger is healthy. Losing without curiosity is decay. The moment, not my fault, becomes the main feeling. The notebook goes blank. You are not auditing slippage between plan and execution. You are baptizing it. You are not measuring expectancy. You are reciting it. Discipline, unmeasured, is cosplay. The line about high probability begs for numbers you never bring. High compared to what? To your own sample, cherry-picked across a honeymoon stretch. To some backtest where the moving average is tuned by hindsight. You still talk like the next trade somehow benefits from the last loss, which is a gambler's whisper in a quant's accent. If outcomes are independent in your framework, the higher chance now, belief is delusion. If outcomes are dependent because regime clustering is real, then your trade all signals mantra ignores the dependency that actually matters. Either way, the story loops back on itself and calls it wisdom. When you call trading a game, you think you are lowering the emotional temperature. Fine. But games have finite rounds, explicit rules, and a scoreboard that resets. Your own words fight you. The market does not reset. Your equity curve compounds pain and reward alike. Telling yourself it is a game invites a dangerous kind of courage, the type that sizes up because the last few losses were routine variants. That is how risk management becomes a bedtime story about leverage and ratios, not a live conversation about drift, correlation spikes, and the ugly tales you pretend will smooth out because you are obedient. You claim stage 3 ends when you admit you cannot predict. That admission is necessary. It is not sufficient. Your text still predicts, just in softer language. It predicts that process purity will bend randomness into profit. It predicts that the system will always win if you trade it long enough. It predicts that being unbothered is the same as being calibrated. The market hears those predictions and smiles. If the comfort is built on circular logic and polite self-forgiveness, what happens when the polite part stops hiding, the circular part, and the drawdown keeps chewing? Where does your so-called aha live then? You slipped a quiet promise into the script and hoped nobody would call it out. Take every signal, accept the losses, and the curve will bend because the system wins over time. That is not humility before randomness. That is a forecast in disguise. You deny prediction with one breath and sneak it back in with the next as a faith in long-run convergence. The long run you are banking on is not a calendar. It is a distribution with teeth. And your story never asks how many consecutive bites your account can take while you keep nodding about process. Saying you will cut your losses hard is nice. Saying it only after the damage is routine turns it into theater. The bod, not my fault tone is the dead giveaway. You frame losses as inevitable noise, then act like the absence of anger equals professionalism. Cool head, empty notebook. Every red print becomes a shrug with philosophy sprinkled on top. You say you will exit if a trade is not good, but your own text never defines what not good means beyond post hoc vibes. Is it a break of premise or a spike of fear? You conflate the two and call it stoic. That is how emotional thresholds become fake rules. You think you are regulated by method. In reality, you are throttled by mood. No worries. Right. Put on another one. The next signal is statistically blessed, at least in your head. Then there is the quiet leverage drift. You talk about ratios and risk like they are seasoned habits now, but the order of operations gives you away. Comfort first, sizing second. You feel safer because you finally get the philosophy. So size creeps while you swear the risk per trade is constant. The math you are avoiding is not exotic. The more you push size when confidence is high, the more one bad cluster can turn a routine drawdown into a cliff. You did not map sequences. You baptized sequences. You wrapped a variance in a bedtime story and hoped the monster under the bed respects bedtime. The moving average line you idolize as simple and enough carries a cost you carefully ignore. You want a rule that filters chaos and a headspace that executes it clean. Fine. But your own narrative never addresses parameter lock-in. You picked a line that felt right and swore loyalty. When the tape shifts, that loyalty turns into dead weight. Your answer: keep trading all signals, because consistency is king. Consistency is not a deity. It is a liability when it clings to yesterday's context. You called it grit. It reads like willingly walking into a meat grinder and praising your stride. Your psychology reading binge becomes a new costume. Instead of chasing magic indicators, you now chase magic acceptance. No one can predict the next 10 seconds. True. But you translate that into, I am absolved as long as I execute. That is moral licensing with a trading badge. The edge sentence in your head, whatever version of this has a high probability you repeat, never gets interrogated with ugly questions. What degrades it? When does it go dormant? What kind of chop invalidates it without a single dramatic signal? You do not touch those. You preach serenity and call it rigor, while the tape laughs and keeps shaking the tree. Even the line about joy and comfort is a tell. You say you finally feel at ease and that this ease fuels better decisions. That is how dopamine reroutes your process. The rush of being a disciplined operator replaces the hard grind of being a suspicious analyst of your own claims. You built an identity around being the consistent executor. Identity is sticky, and sticky identity resists revision. When the market hints that your cherished signal is stale, identity will defend it and call the defense virtue. You will keep clicking, shedding blood, sweat, and tears, insisting the pain is the fee for doing things the right way. And the sweetest illusion sits right at the end. You declare the stage ends when you admit you cannot predict. You think the door closes there. It barely opens. You admitted uncertainty, then immediately tried to domesticate it with a one-line method. A calm face, and a promise that the next trade is probabilistically kinder because your system always wins. You traded superstition for ceremony. You got wrecked less loudly, not less deeply. So, when the tape refuses your ceremony and the losses pile in neat, obedient rows, how long before your holy consistency turns into plain old stubbornness? And how much comfort will you still claim when the curve keeps leaning the wrong way? You painted the clean picture. I will put the dirt back where it belongs. You say the market is unknowable in the next 10 seconds, and you accept that. Reality says your next paragraph still treats a moving average like a compass that never glitches. You say take every signal because the job is execution. Reality says execution without discrimination is just speed-running mistakes. You say losses do not bother you because unpredictability is baked in. Reality says pain dulled by philosophy is still pain, and the curve does not care how enlightened the face looks while it slides. You hold the tidy belief that simplicity plus headspace plus risk rules equals durability. That is the naive column. In the harsh column sits drift. Headspace drifts. Volatility drifts. Liquidity drifts. The moving average that felt razor sharp last month gets sloppy this month. But the loyalty you call consistency keeps you married to it. You think the market will reward loyalty. The market rewards adaptability measured in expectancy, not identity. You are proud of being the trader who follows signals. Fine. The tape does not pay for costume design. You lean on high probability like a safety rail. You never specify which sample built that probability, which time frame held it, or which filter kept the whipsaw out. Harsh reality asks for context and gets silence. Naive thinking treats probability like a permanent sticker. Harsh reality treats it like a mood that changes with the crowd. The spread, the session, the clustering of chop. You write as if the next trade is somehow kinder after a loss, because the system then always wins. That is not statistics. That is folklore. When the tails show up in sequence, the folklore nods and keeps clicking. Then the equity tells the truth in a single language. You claim trading is just a game, so the one job is to follow the rules. The naive version loves the mantra. The harsh version pulls back the camera. Games have fixed rules and clean resets. Markets mutate rules on the fly and compound every misstep. Your game metaphor sedates you exactly when suspicion should spike. You sighs with confidence because it feels like you evolved. You talk leverage like a pro, but the order of your decisions exposes you. Confidence first, sighs second. The drift in your comfort slides into the drift in your exposure. You keep saying the risk per trade is controlled, while correlation across signals quietly stacks the deck against you. The sheet shows one risk unit. The cluster behaves like three. You read psychology and you think you solved the hardest part. The naive column loves the calm. The harsh column looks at calibration. Calm is not calibration. Shrugging off losses because prediction is impossible is not the same as proving the premise failed fast and clean. Your text says exit if the trade is not good. Define not good. Is it a break of premise, or a spike of emotion, or a regime flip your template does not even recognize? You blurred the lines and called that maturity. The blur costs money. You finally admit you cannot predict and declare the stage complete. The naive column treats that admission like a diploma. The harsh column files it under orientation. You did not remove prediction. You embedded it inside a process cult. You now predict that obedience will grind the randomness into profit. You predict that the system will always win if given enough runway. You predict that a calm face equals a calibrated method. The tape smiles at those predictions because they are softer, subtler, and easier to ignore when they fail. You traded loud superstition for quiet ceremony. The losses respect neither. There is a hidden corner your story avoids every time. When the moving average chops you to pieces across a stretch of days, your framework gives you two options that both feel righteous. Keep executing because consistency is sacred, or tweak the rule because adaptability is smart. You call both professional. You cannot be both at once. Without a way to decide, you are just flipping a coin and giving the coin a motivational speech. The naive story says any choice wrapped in discipline is fine. The harsh story asks which choice preserves expectancy, not ego. If that question keeps getting dodged, what kind of alternative lens would cut through the ceremony and put teeth back into your so-called acceptance? Here is the escape route that does not feel like one. Instead of worshiping simplicity or worshiping consistency, flip the lens to expectancy and context. Not the poster on the wall kind, actual expectancy. The kind that cares about sequences and clustering and how your so-called high probability melts when the tape changes temperature. Your story keeps promising that taking every signal is noble. An alternative reading says signals are not citizens with equal rights. They are suspects that only earn permission when the environment matches the premise that birthed them. The moving average is not the premise. The premise is the behavior it pretends to tag: trend persistence, pullback participation, momentum continuation. When that behavior fades, the line becomes a tourist. You can keep clicking and call it discipline, or you can admit the premise is off-duty. Only one of those protects expectancy, and it is not the one that looks cooler on a motivational poster. You talk about headspace like it is the magic reagent that makes the simple rule work. Fine. Headspace matters, but treat it like a variable with drift, not a trophy. The alternative lens asks what happens when headspace itself becomes the bias. Calm can hide stubbornness just as easily as fear can trigger flinch exits. The trick is not serenity. It is falsifiability. A statement that can be wrong at a precise moment beats a mantra that cannot be wrong until the long run is over. Trade all signals cannot be wrong until the account forces the verdict. Trade when the premise is live can be wrong the second the premise breaks. One version gives you a timestamp for cutting risk hard. The other gives you a bedtime story about being consistent. You keep saying losses do not bother you because unpredictability is baked in. Good posture. Wrong use. Unpredictability is not an alibi. It is a cost that needs a price. The alternative view prices it by planning for streaks, not singles. Not just risk per trade, but risk per sequence. Because the tape does not distribute pain evenly. Your narrative leans on per-trade neatness while clusters do the real damage. When you believe the next trade is kinder because the system always wins, you underprice the cluster. When you treat clusters as a feature of the distribution, you stop pretending the next trade owes you anything. That change alone turns cute discipline into adult supervision. Your comfort with the line, "just follow the rules," sounds strong until you ask which rule fires first when rules collide. Consistency and adaptability will always collide. The naive version says both can coexist. The alternative version forces a tiebreaker that lives outside mood. Call it a pre-registered clause. When behavior X disappears for Y sessions or Z range compresses beyond a threshold, the signal is off until a defined sign of life returns. Not a tweak frenzy. Not a panic. Just a standing clause that takes the wheel when your inner cheerleader wants another swing. You do not need to add glittering complexity. You need a switch that does not care about your urge to prove you are loyal. Your psychology binge has value if it stops being costume and starts being audit. The escape route turns "I am calm" into "I am calibrated." Calibration is ugly because it forces you to admit when the comfortable identity, the consistent executor, has become the risk. Your text says you feel joy and ease now. The alternative perspective treats joy as a signal to check for overconfidence drift. Not to stop trading. Not to freeze. To check. A clean expectancy table beats a clean conscience every day, because the table does not flinch when you are in love with your method. You say the stage concludes when you admit you cannot predict. The alternative sees that admission as the start of a different job. Stop predicting even indirectly. Process purity is an indirect prediction that obedience will grind randomness into profit. Replace that with conditional permissioning. Signals do not earn clicks because they exist. They earn clicks because the background agrees. When the background says no, the oldest virtue in your story, consistency turns into vanity. The moving average can stay on the screen. It just loses voting rights when its behavior is off-season. That is not betrayal. That is survival. If you are willing to trade ceremony for calibration and loyalty for expectancy, then the aha moment stops being a confession and finally becomes a tool. So, what does the sharpened version of your stage 3 look like? When the ego is out of the driver's seat and the market still refuses to play nice. You called it the aha stage, like a doorway out of confusion. I see the doorway. And I also see the lock you forgot to mention. The lock is the quiet faith that obedience alone bends randomness into profit. You rejected prediction. Good. Then you predicted indirectly with every line about high probability. Always wins in the long run. And just follow all the signals. That is the core contradiction the whole script keeps orbiting. Harmonizing it means stripping the romance from both sides. The human matters. Yes. The system matters. Yes. Neither carries you when context flips. The moving average can live on your chart. It just does not get to vote when its premise goes missing. Your calm can sit in your chair. It just does not get to silence the audit when the curve sours. That is not cynicism. That is alignment. You said nobody can predict the next 10 seconds, let alone the next 20 minutes. Keep that sentence. Burn the rest of the superstition. Uncertainty is not a warm blanket. It is a meter with a bill. You pay it in sequences, not singles. Your story glorifies per-trade neatness while the account bleeds in clusters. You say the next trade gets kinder because the system wins over time. The market hears that like a dare and lines up 3 more body shots. The fix is not more stoicism, it is sharper falsifiability. When does your premise die in real time? What exact behavior says the signal is off-season? If the answer is later, the system will balance it. You already know why the drawdown keeps pulling you by the collar. You leaned into comfort once you accepted unpredictability. Comfort is fine when it is earned by calibration. It is poison when it is earned by ceremony. Ceremony is trading every signal because the rule says so. Calibration is trading when background behavior agrees and cutting it cold when it does not. Your text says losses do not make you angry. Good. But if losses no longer make you curious, that calm is a liability. You called trading a game. The scoreboard here never resets. Every click compounds into your future, whether you are composed or tilted. So, the so-called game has one job that matters. Keep expectancy positive and keep variance survivable while you are wrong more often than your ego likes to admit. You framed risk management like a final. Lesson ratios. Leverage. Rules. The order betrays you. Confidence first. Size second is how size drifts, while you congratulate yourself for being disciplined. The discipline you celebrate is button press discipline. The discipline you avoid is suspension discipline, the ability to withhold action when your beloved context is asleep. That is the one that saves accounts quietly. Nobody claps for an avoided trade. Nobody posts a screenshot of nothing. That is the point. The cleanest winners in your narrative are the risks never taken when the premise was dead on arrival. You are close to something useful. The human matters because the human decides when a premise is live, when a rule deserves to stand down, when a loss teaches and when it merely repeats. The system matters because it translates premise into action without winging it. The so-called aha only works when both are chained to a single test. Does this click belong in this background at this moment? And what exact event would prove it does not? Not a vibe, not a mood, not a shrug about randomness. A line in the sand the market can cross and embarrass you in daylight. That embarrassment is how the account stays alive. It is the receipt that says you cut your losses hard because the premise broke, not because the candle looks scary. So keep your sentence about unpredictability. It is the only honest one. Tie it to a living checklist that can be wrong now, not just right eventually. Give your moving average permission only when its behavior is in season. Price your risk in sequences, not in fairy tales about long-run salvation. Audit without mercy and let comfort be the byproduct, not the compass. Call that the adult version of your stage 3. No magic indicator. No magic robot. No magic calm, just alignment between premise, permission, and position. The market will still be rude. It will still throw pump and dump traps and try to get you wrecked on a quiet Tuesday. No worries, say it with a smirk this time, because when the background says no, the best trade is the one that never prints. And when it says yes, the click is a statement you can defend without hiding behind philosophy. If this hit home, share it with your buddies who keep mistaking ceremony for skill. And if you want more of these razor-sharp breakdowns that cut through the noise without fluff, slide into the crew at Mind Over Markets and subscribe. So the next time your comfort starts pretending to be edge, you have a louder voice in your ear reminding you what actually pays.